Squirrel. Good morning, JNUC. Everybody ready for the last session? Yeah, everybody had a fun time at the party, didn't they? All right, last session. We're going to talk about Jamf Migrate for iOS. We're going to bring up Dan and Jackson and Mr. Matt Phillips.
Yep. Thank you very much. We coordinate this way. All righty. We all hear us? We see us?
Right on. Thank you, Steve. Right, welcome, welcome. Good to see you. Looks like some people are still coming in. All right, we're here to talk about Jamf Migrate for iOS. And I must confess, we will be touching on quite a bit more than simply migrations for iOS. Jamf Migrate also works for Mac. That's just not the focus of this session. So we'll be showing you a little bit about both. And as Steve said, my name is Matthew Phillips, a senior consulting engineer for Jamf. We have us today Jackson Pavelka, IT operations for PDS Health. And Kyle Randall, not present, but he was instrumental in helping with migrations and the creation of this presentation. He's not able to be here with me, so we found a time-traveling extraordinaire, an Australian, Daniel McLaughlin. Everything's upside down for Australians, so we'll just keep that going. And we're going to jump right into device migrations. So when we're talking about moving devices, it's not that hard. But it's also not exactly easy, right? So one of the common things that people say is, how hard can it be? The problem is not the technology, the problem is the users and getting the devices over to your new environment. So today we're going to talk about the common challenges of a device migration, and we're going to go over Jamf Migrate, the app, right, the service, what we've built, and what we offer. Crucially, the fact that Jamf Migrate is not just an app, it's a service. We've worked with professional services to help craft your migration and decide on what critical steps are right for you and how you're going to design and plan your migration. And we're actually going to talk with customer success here. We have Jackson, and there's actually a few other customers in the room that have been successful Jamf migration customers also, to talk about the fact that the success of it is really around you and the planning of it. So when you're talking about wiping a device, specifically iOS, the way you get them to move from your current MDM, if it's a non-Jamf solution, is you wipe them and they set themselves up in the new Jamf server, right? And that's not great. No one likes that. Your users don't like that. And to be honest, the MDM server doesn't even like that because it's just a bunch of devices just show up, right? So we want to craft that process. And what we do is we slow it down and we take it and put it in the hands of the users. So as we've got here, historically, you go over into Apple Business Manager and you point the devices to the new Jamf server. And as soon as they're pointing to the Jamf server, you then decide on when and how you're going to go into your console, if your MDM server console even supports mass wiping. Otherwise, you've got to create a ticket. Maybe they reach out and you say, are you ready? We're going to send the wipe command. And the user's like, wait, I didn't back up my photos. I don't have anything. I can't handle a wipe. So it's an awful process, and that's why we got a cave painting here to talk about, like, back in the day, that's how it was done. Some MDMs are still providing that solution as their main way to migrate into their platform. You know, if you find the MDM vendor on the street that's going to offer bringing you in, they might offer that kind of solution. So ours is different, right? Jamf Migrate puts it in the hands of the users, and critically, you don't have to erase the device. So this solution, we're going to say, is so 5 years ago. In fact, we're going to take a step back in time, 2018, not to pitch another presentation that I did, but if you want to, that link is the YouTube video.
So narcissistic.
Oh, come on.
Classic narcissist.
I'd hate to have to pitch to a presentation, but I love the fact that I got away with that artwork from a classic video game. We did a presentation on migrating to the cloud with Jamf Cloud. And if anyone here is still on-prem, it's a great session to check out, because if it's stopping you from getting to cloud, you should check it out. At the end of that session in the QA, somebody said, that's all great, moving devices with Jamf re-enroller, but how do we do it for iOS? And I foolishly stood on the stage and said, yeah, I wish there was an app for that. There just isn't. Maybe someday someone will write it. That would be really cool. Stupid man. Foolish me. Just about 4 months later, I was learning Swift and figuring out how to write an app, and together my team built what became Jamf Migrate. And this is it. That's the app, right? It's just an icon. So there you go. You've seen it. Yay!
Thanks very much.
Right on. Take care. No, but I do want to jump into the demo because that's the most important part. We're going to see the magic and see it work. So without further ado, we'll show you the migration. Actually, wait.
No, we won't.
So,
Yeah.
okay, we're not going to try to postpone the whole thing. It's not a. I'm not deliberately creating suspense, but we just put together a webinar last week and put it out there. So there is a full tilt video of the demonstration of Jamf Migrate for both Mac and iOS, and we go deep into the planning and the UI and all the things that it offers. So this session is really just to kind of talk about what else there is that's not covered in this video that's available for you. It is on YouTube, but this link will take you to the Jamf main page to give you the information along with the link. All right, now we'll see the video. This iPad is fully managed and supervised in an MDM, that's Microsoft. And we're showing here that it's supervised as well as managed, and you'll see critically that the remove profile is not there. So the user can't actually ask to remove management. That has to be something done by the admin in IT. So we use the MDM to deploy the Jamf Migrate app. And when it lands on the device, when the user's good and ready, when they've got the right time and they're on full battery and have internet, they launch the app. We check the prerequisites, make sure they're ready and eligible for the migration. And we show them a bit of information they need to know before they get started. At this point, our app reaches out to a secure server, kicks the migration via the API, and we remove the MDM profile. And at this point, we send some information to the end user, say these are the steps you have to take, because at this point the device is not managed, and they need to go through these steps on the glass to enroll into Jamf. So we present a profile to them, they tap close, and then we bring them right back into our Migrate app for a second to present them the profile in a way that's really hard to miss. And if they hit install, then they're essentially enrolling into Jamf right now. And if they get lost, they return to our app. We just have a loop that says go back to that profile page and keep clicking it until you're done. And at this point, the device is supervised and fully Jamf managed. So after they're enrolled, you'll notice the managed apps there, the EMMs, none of those disappear. That all stays. Jamf Pro will begin managing those apps and also additionally install its own. You'll see self-service popped up. So we pop back into Migrate. Hooray, congratulations. You get a little confetti, an endorphin rush, right? And then at that point, we use Jamf to, we're going to hop into self-service.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. It just confirms that it's done. Self-service gets branded there with the icon in the corner. And you have access to any new apps that weren't available when you were on the old MDM. Now you've got access to Jamf apps. We also remove the old MDM's apps, right? If it's a portal app or an app catalog or something, you don't need that anymore. As part of the migration, we yank that app out. There it goes. We also remove the Migrate app, because they don't need that either. That happens within the next 24 hours. Cool. So that was it.
Yeah.
Crit.
Last session of the day, you got to be. No.
Wow, thanks.
No, we have more.
It was, yeah, thank you. Right. But that's the process, and there's caveats to all of the details, and that's why we say the part of this, the migration, is a planning process, because not all MDMs are created equal, not all the features are available with every single MDM, depending on who you use to manage your iOS devices. But we want to make it as easy as possible to get your users over to Jamf without losing their data. So, talking about building the app, why this became a thing, how we got here. It was for the need to not have to wipe devices, right? So we had, critically, the main criteria was to be able to erase the devices if that was needed for the customer. The first one we did it with was a major airline, right?
Major airline.
Yeah.
No outage window, 24/7.
And the issue there was that the people on the ground couldn't ever be without their device, so they knew they needed to wipe the device, but they couldn't do it as a mass action. They needed to do it when they were ready before they were, I don't know, in the air on an airplane. And so the first version of Migrate was called Swipe, and it stood for Super Wipe because it did wiping, but it did a lot more. Some people accidentally called it S-Wipe, and that was weird.
Like JamF?
JamF,
Yeah.
S-Wipe. Letters and names are hard. So it is now, the app is fully known as Jamf Migrate, and it's not just an app, but also a service. And it's important to note that all of the features, including battery detection and Wi-Fi steering and location and a EULA and other options, have all been driven by customer needs, right? Because working with different customers, when we start rolling out the migration, they say, you know what we're noticing is our users keep tapping this or they get stuck here. Can we add a thing? And we've built all of these features into the app. And it is as robust as it is now because of those changes. The elevator pitch, I suppose, is, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Jamf Reset. Anyone knows what that is? The idea is, of course, the app, when we were trying to get our management to allow us to write this thing, we were like, you know, like Jamf Reset, but in the other guy's MDM, right? So we deploy it over there, and then they push a button, and then it moves the device over. And that was how we got away with the idea, at least.
Mostly, yeah.
And so there it is again. And here's a UI look at it, right? This is the default behavior of swipe. Just information on the screen is all customizable, the color and branding. You can certainly add a logo if you're into color branding to match your brand. And if you're, this is an example of a UI that I built to mock up for a customer that we did a migration for that was fully featured, and it was mocked up after their own internal app as a way to sell them the idea. And this sort of customization is not part of the migration. If you're looking for a bespoke app or an icon that brands it to your company logo, we have options.
We have options, but money.
Yeah, they're not free. But know that the standard Jamf Migrate solution as part of the package is just the vanilla build, which is customizable and is at least color branding, and words on the screen can be customized.
One key distinction would be you can brand everything inside the app. You can't brand the app icon.
That's right.
With the standard version.
Yeah.
And if you are very curious about that, you want to call it a very specific name and you want that app icon, money.
Right. And importantly, we have a lot of customers that main focus is branding, right? Their name and their icon, but also the users they know to tap the thing that has the company logo. And they may have 4 or 5 logos on their home screen that are all the same exact logo because it's that company brand. And if they get some whack-ass squirrely logo that they don't recognize, then they won't want to touch it.
No.
So we work with them to create a bespoke app for that migration experience. Well, I've been talking a bit. I need a drink of water.
Yeah.
Ben, do you want to talk about the tech behind it?
Sure, absolutely.
Here.
So,
There's
a laser pointer on this.
Oh,
yeah. So not all APIs are the same. So this was a real interesting sort of journey for us here on. I've been in Jamf for a very long time. I lament sometimes about how Jamf's API works. Then I said, okay, the grass is not always greener. Because then I started experiencing and that, because we were testing this against other competitors and other things like that have APIs. Like, okay, they're all doing something different. They might say they're using the standard, but there's 15 standards. That's ridiculous. We need to unify that. There are now 16 standards. So that was sort of like how we sort of focused on that there. Response codes are really interesting as well in how they approach that. Like a success isn't always a success. Sometimes it's an acknowledgement, and we're like, well, did you do it? Lots of works and lots of discoveries on that there. Sometimes we didn't get any responses.
Sure.
That was interesting.
Yeah.
Not going to name names. I'm not here to name names, but I have gray hairs.
No, but the idea that we had to decouple the request that our app is making to the secure migration server, and then the code that Daniel wrote for the back end will actually kind of intercept and talk to the specific MDM's interesting quirks and things like when you get an unmanaged command, you might receive a response code that you wouldn't normally expect from an API, but you can handle it and say, oh, when that MDM says that number, they actually mean they did do it. It looks like an error from here, but it worked.
Yeah. Yeah. Empty response bodies was one for.
Yeah. How troubling is that when you're using the API of an MDM and you send it a command and it responds with nothing?
Yeah.
But that's a response. You're like, what happened? Something.
But yeah, so the also idea and approach with this there is like API creds, and we are talking to the API, so API credentials are required. Putting those on the device, either on the Mac OS or on the iOS, terrifies me, terrifies security, and is not a good thing. And we are very focused on security at Jamf. So the idea is like, okay, this is where the secure web server comes into play, is the app talks to the secure web server, the web server is doing the API calls. This also allows us a few other things, like we can limit the IP address that it's coming from. Maybe you're on-prem, maybe you have some firewall rules, things like that. Whereas if you had to like, okay, allow all of our devices to contact the API, you need to rethink about that. So we also sort of allows us the flexibility of like, we don't have to then keep branding and customizing at the app level. We can, if there's a new MDM server that comes out tomorrow and they meet some criteria like having an API, we can integrate that into the web server. We don't have to redevelop the app.
Or indeed changing the endpoints, which happens sometimes.
That happens sometimes.
Yeah, we say that we support as many MDM vendors as we've come in contact with, but doesn't mean that their API endpoints haven't changed in the last few years. So we're able to pivot and keep it up to date without reissuing and reauthoring a version of our app.
And it's the same web server that would be used by both the macOS and the iOS clients. So again, that helps so many of us, really.
Right. Right.
But yeah, scaling is hard.
Sure.
And we're a team of 10, 11.
Yeah.
I'm based in Australia, so yeah, I get to work in everyone else's outage window because I'm in the future and the past at the same time. But when we start grabbing more like MDM support and compatibility, and then our customers are seeing this, like, great, when are you free? I'm like, no.
Right. And also keep the app up to date, and also fix that web backend, and then schedule a migration with your oodles of free time.
And then also do all the other things that we're
your real job.
Yeah, the real job, right? So this is again why we also work very heavily with our services team. They are a fantastic team. They are global. There are more than 10 of them.
A bit more.
A bit more.
Quite a bit more.
And also they're very knowledgeable about moving the customers to Jamf, and like they're knowledgeable about that. It's what they do. So that was how we sort of work with them and put that there. It's very important to recall as well, like moving the device from one MDM to another. We've had customers say like, oh, and how do I export everything from the old MDM into Jamf Pro? And we say, don't, because you probably don't want to, right? But that sort of also leads into, should we be moving it to Jamf Pro? And this is where they're working through with our services and our solutions and all that there about like, if you've already got problems in your previous MDM vendor, what are those problems? Are they just going to be the same problems with a different badge or a different logo, a different vendor? So that's also what part of this approach is. We don't sell it just because we want to sell it. Can Jamf solve more of your problems and make life easier for you by moving over? And so that's also why services are involved with. We're not going to just export out everything from the old and then dump it into the new, because that's replicating your problems. We want to start you off on the right foot with Jamf and get that better sort of jumpstart experience, the onboarding, everything around those there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so with that, you've heard enough from us, and we're obviously going to brag about that there. So we'll actually hear from someone who actually went through it.
Right.
So Jackson.
Jackson, take over.
Which button do I press? There's two.
The middle bit?
Well, the laser pointer one will distract him, but the big, yeah, the big green one, not the little green one.
I'm Jackson. I'm an engineer with Pacific Dental Services, now PDS Health. When we were looking to shop for a new MDM product, we moved over to Jamf after doing an analysis of about 6 different MDMs. And during the purchasing process, it was brought up that this was a option through some of the questions we were asking about how they handle migrations from previous MDMs to new ones. And our VP wisely made a handshake deal that this would be included as a beta customer for our migration. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about was considerations that you need to make before you decide to migrate migrate your devices, and whether or not to wipe them or not to wipe them. Who's going to be using the device? In our case, most of these devices were going to be patient-facing. So because of that, we didn't want to do a mass wipe action command, and we also didn't want to inconvenience any workflows at the office or clinic level. How's the device secured physically? If you don't wipe the device, you can remove the management profile after your migration. So these devices were being handed to patients. So our asset management team, when we told them they could, if we didn't wipe the device and we did a migration, that the patient could remove the profile and walk out with the iPad, well, that was a problem. And so we actually decided to go with a wiping workflow, but still use the Jamf Migrate app so that all of our users could perform the migration, and our 17 field techs didn't have to visit 1,000 locations and do this all themselves.
Jackson, that's an excellent call out, and I feel like I should mention that our pro services team would rather you do the wiping workflow, because that puts, at Jamf, it puts your devices in the best possible state to be fully managed and fully supervised with that profile removable. But it's not the right solution for everyone, and that's why Migrate supports both. But interestingly, if you're doing a migration, we can split that. And you can do both types of migration during, so half of your fleet, if they're important C-level staff or people who just can't tolerate losing their data, those can be wiped that way. Although if I'm honest, the C-level staff are the ones that need the profile locked the most. Yes. And then if you have other devices that are labs or carts or something, then those can suffer through a wipe. Then you can do both models during any one migration that you're doing.
Yeah, and it gives you options, right? So you can segregate your devices based on what you need to do. One of the other questions you need to ask yourself is there available Wi-Fi where you're going to be performing the migration? Because if not, if you don't have an open network or a network that your users are able to connect to, and you're going to end up wiping the device, well, now the device is a brick. And you're going to have a lot more problems. And is the time saving of not wiping the device worth the potential of a device walking out the door because the profile got removed? To do our migration, we migrated from a previous inferior product.
Customer said it, I didn't.
We tagged the device in that product for the migration, and we would have the customer open the app on the device, follow the prompts on the device. Like you saw from their screenshots, you can fully customize those prompts so the customer can do, maybe they're used to seeing a specific type of language, or maybe you have some kind of internal cultural terminology that you need to use or that your marketing team wants you to have. Well, you can rewrite all of those prompts. And then after the device was wiped, automated device enrollment would set the device back up. We had a dedicated Wi-Fi network that was deployed to our offices so that these devices could connect to so that they could pull down the profile from Jamf and set themselves up.
Oh, that reminds me, something we skipped over. I must have done it in my blurry haze.
Yes.
We're starting to add support for some of the MDM vendors as they start supporting RTS or return to service. We're realizing that we can hook into that API for them. And so if you're choosing to do a wiping migration, we can do that vendor's version of return to service, which wipes the device and includes the Wi-Fi payload. So after it comes back online, it's already ready to go onto, say, a staged network or some kind of open Wi-Fi that's part of your environment. Yeah. So it saves that many steps on the glass of the user trying to get it on Wi-Fi just to complete their migration.
And most of the bigger ones are moving towards it because it is a fantastic tool and protocol that Apple has released. But if you make feature requests about us supporting it, it needs to be the vendor because that's where the starting point is.
Right.
They released it just in time for us to turn off our MDM migration server. Yep. We also use the Jamf Setup app in our migration to allow the offices to select a specific workflow that they would like the iPad to work with. So whether it's a patient check-in device, some of our, why am I giving that to you?
Yeah, we want to be on that one.
Oh. Whether it's a patient check-in device or some other type of device like an orthodontic device where they're uploading pictures to Invisalign, things like that, all of those different workflows can be supported based on the selection they make in the Migrate app you see up there. We're also an Epic shop, so you'll see up there the MyChart patient check-in option as well.
Right on. Cool. So last up is probably the obvious question is how do you get it? If this is right for you, what's it take to get it? And often there's a question about a demo. Like, can we demo this during our trial? Like, we want to maybe get our feet wet and see if this is right. We already manage Macs, but we want to move some iOS over from some of the other MDMs. And the answer is it requires an engagement because we talked about the secure migration server. It lives in the cloud, and we have to connect both MDMs to it, and it's a non-zero cost to have that running. So while we can demo it and show it to you, actually having it stood up in your environment requires an engagement with Jamf. So reach out to your contact or your sales team, and they'll get you sorted.
Yeah. It also, as I said, on that migration server usually requires API credentials.
Right.
So then you're talking to the other team, and you're getting, and that's a whole challenge in itself, right?
And not something that you'd want to do during a sort of trial-ish environment.
And from the user's point of view, it doesn't matter if you're moving from Jamf to Jamf or insert other MDM vendor to Jamf. The end user experience is exactly what you've seen. So even though we're like, well, but yeah, we're different, we're unique. You're not?
You're not.
I'm sorry to say.
You are a unique snowflake, just like all the other ones.
Yeah, like, one question I do have for you, like, can you, and you might have asked that, can you sort of give an indication how many devices?
Yeah, so we had a little under 3,200 iPads across 1,000 locations, and we were able to migrate them without our techs having to touch a single one.
Yeah, and that's the critical difference, right? A little over 3,200. Some people are like, oh, that's not bad. That's kind of small. And then you go, oh, over 1,000 locations across the country.
Yeah.
And that's those decision-making things where you're like, sometimes, what were we just talking to a customer the other day? And
Yesterday, yeah.
He said, you're interested in Migrate. How many devices do you have? And she said,
20,000.
oh,
That
20.
pause
Why
though.
was the pause? There was like a really, really aggressive pause. 20,000.
We have had customers who have migrated from a small number to that. There is no minimum seat count for a migration, right? It is more the service engagement.
Right.
There might be minimum seat counts on the Jamf Pro side or
Sure,
the license.
but if
stuff
you
like
have 50 devices that are absolutely important and you want to use this tool, there's no customer that is too small
Yeah.
or too large.
Definitely putting that power at the user's level though. So as we referred to one of the very early stages, that was that it was an airline, full global, and those devices were in pilot's hands, ground stuff. There was no window at all that an admin could go and say wipe, wipe, wipe.
Yeah.
So they just did the communication is key to the users though. Knowing that, and Jackson sort of spoke to that as well, explaining what they're going to see, all this stuff, because the users aren't going to read it, but you're going to have to drill that in first, and that's all part of your planning as well.
Yeah, so we actually were able to, we drafted a really good knowledge base article that was provided to all of our office managers and essentially said, if you want your iPad to continue working, you need to take these steps.
Yeah.
And for the most part, that was highly successful. Every now and again, we still have somebody that just finds a couple of iPads that are still on that old MDM, and they're like, it doesn't work, and we have to replace them. But outside of that, it was an extremely successful migration.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point to make. The cleanup process is its own part that's built into the migration service. The idea that once it's set up and tested and running, we have a window of time where you're doing the migration, and then Jamf will reach back out to you at a wrap-up stage, like how did it go, what's our next steps, we decommission the migration experience, and then you sort of pull the plug on that MDM and get all the rest of the devices over into Jamf. We have had some of the massive customer migrations where at the end of the migration, they just did a mass wipe of the remaining ones that refused to migrate, and they sort of found a massive amount of devices that just started popping up. Hey, I lost my certs and my mail stuff went away, and the idea that you could like find a non-zero amount of devices because you didn't even know they were out there in the world until you took them out of the old MDM.
We did allow plenty of time. We expected there was going to be some questions. So are there questions? Oh, we got one.
All right.
We're going to make Steve walk all over the room.
And I don't think we made this perfectly clear, but the destination opportunity when you're migrating to Jamf, we've been vague on the word, not just Jamf Pro, but also Jamf School as a valid destination.
Yep.
If you're migrating devices and you're in education, Jamf School, we can use this with as well.
Okay. If you do the non-wipe command, is it basically doing a provisional enrollment? Is that why the profile is removable?
Yeah, because this is very much on Apple security posture, is the user is then being involved with that enrollment. Therefore, the user could remove the management. We have also sort of like had plenty of customers that have sort of had to weigh that up, and as Sir Jackson alluded to as well. But you can also then attach a lot of things to that profile, right? So if they did remove the profile and everything that was corporate that you really cared about also went with it, is the value of the data on there that's attached to the profile worth more or less than the value of the device?
Right.
But definitely we've had a lot of our customers, and like the airline as an example, they didn't want to wipe. They were so adamant, so you got to find a way around this. But they needed that profile to never be removable because of the industry that they're in and the regulations they had to comply with. So they were like, okay, so we are still wiping because we need to prevent that unenrollment. But again, it still gave that power of instead of one mass action to pick a window to send it, the users were in control of when that was going to happen.
Do you have any customers that put them in single lap mode, so it just kind of forces them to see that screen right when it comes up? And
So we have the fun thing with the single app mode is then they can't go and download the profile and install it because that's in settings.
Yep.
So we've had a couple of customers sort of think about that there.
We've mocked up that workflow and sort of in demoing it, in practice, it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
Launching our Migrate app into single app mode to force them to use it requires a secondary task to take it out so they can do their business.
If you are wiping, the single app mode method does work.
Yes.
But if you're doing that no wiping method, yeah, single app mode doesn't work for that.
And to that, we have had customers that have used kiosks and iPads that are sort of locked down in certain environments, and they just flipped them into single app mode for Migrate, and the boots on the ground went around and tapped them.
Yeah.
So there was no way to mess that up.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no worries.
Yep. Question over here.
So just for a small bit of context, we're stuck with a certain inferior MDM product that's had like 4 owners in the past year. I don't know, the screenshot looked a little familiar earlier. And we're trying to get to the process of migrating. One of the things that worries me about the migrate is that the user can remove the profile.
Yep.
Have you seen in your experience that that's like a big deal?
So
That users are actually removing it and causing issues?
it's a balanced decision, right? Realistically, you have to consider your environment, and if you have security compliance reasons, and if there's legal reasons to absolutely not let them be able to remove the profile, that's a consideration you'll have to make. But so much of the things you can put on the device are attached to the MDM. If you yank their certificates and you yank their mail profiles and a lot of their managed apps go away, then the device essentially is useless, right? So that's the question of the sort of, are you using technology to solve a people problem? And the idea that once they're in Jamf, you can monitor when they've lost MDM, and you can run reports, and you can reach out to those employees. But also, if you've crafted your environment right, ideally, it's gonna kind of stop being a useful device. Yeah. And all the proprietary information should have gotten yanked off. So we've had customers where we show them both options, and they start the conversation with, that button must be hidden, and you show them one way, and you show them the other way. They're like, well, maybe we could figure it out, right? And then the idea that, too, those devices can start to fade out, right? Through attrition over the next 18 months or whatever, you might be able to say, those will get wiped, we'll send them new phones, and you contact those users and go, you've been opted to an involuntary upgrade, this is not optional, and here's the new phone that is fully supervised and managed, and that remove button is gone.
Like we had a couple of customers, primarily education,
Yeah.
where they're like,
Man, kids
people
are
are just going to remove this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you are 100% right. We never said don't do that.
Right.
But with some more of our corporate enterprise customers, it's IT testing it and playing with that. It's like, oh, that's removable. Then they remove it. They're like, what happens then next if they do that? And it's like, they didn't mean to. They just press the button.
Right.
Then they've already moved the devices in the back end within their ABM or ASM. So you say, oh, you've done that. You've done stuffed up.
You done stuffed up, sir.
I had to catch myself there. You got to wipe it.
Right.
You got to go erase all content and settings, and then automated enrollment comes and kicks in, right? So that's a way of rather there. And as Matt sort of alluded to, the reporting side on the Jamf Pro, it's like, okay, device hasn't checked in X number of days. Let's go find that person. What did you do?
Right, and it is a cool feature of punishment in the sense that's like, oh, it turns out the only way to recover this profile that you removed is to wipe your device. Yeah. And then they are back up and running through zero touch.
And that also speaks to why this is a professional services engagement, right? Because one of the things that you're going to have to do is explore this with your security team and what's acceptable. Or if you have a corporate asset management team, what is acceptable? What is the risk tolerance, right? And the professional services team is going to be able to help you articulate that in a way that maybe you couldn't because you didn't build Jamf Migrate. Yeah. So that's something that's also going to be really helpful.
We have questions over there.
Oh yeah, we got a guy.
Just for the microphone for the record. Sorry, just for the recording.
Does it require your device to be supervised?
No, it does not. It does not. If the device starts supervised, it will remain supervised. If you require the device to be supervised at the end, you will need to wipe if it's not already. But the only difference really with the unsupervised is the user will probably get a prompt to say this app is about to install versus a silent install method with a supervised device. That's all just Apple stuff. But no, we have had customers who are on unsupervised devices. They're moving it through absolutely fine.
Yeah, and it's worth saying, I try and say this as often as possible, even to some Apple employees, supervision is a device state, right? So adding and removing MDM does not affect whether the device is supervised. Yeah. If it's supervised, it stays that way. If it is not supervised, there's nothing you can do to create supervision short of wiping it and bringing it through Setup Assistant correctly.
And we had a couple of customers like this where their fleet was mixed. Some were supervised, some were unsupervised. Yeah. And they're like, well, what do we do? It's like, well, we need them all supervised. So some people received the non-wiping workflow, others received the wiping workflow, right? So that is the way we get to tailor that experience, is all through that there, as well as like the language that they're going to see. We've had multiple countries or global sort of enterprises run this out, so they've had to like put their localized language messaging into that as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'd want to make sure that was a qualified statement regarding supervision. Mac has the word supervision as well, and that's different. We're speaking specifically in iOS. Yeah. Mac OS, you can make them supervised without having to suffer through the wipe of the device. Yeah. Right on.
Question next to him.
Right next to him.
Perfect.
Have you ever thought about going with helping application migration, like checking on one side which apps were installed and proposing them to user?
Yes, we have. Yes, we actually worked with a customer a few years ago on developing a solution that took an idea of which apps they had opted into and which apps the user had downloaded to the device, so that they would get them on the other side of the migration. And we got about as far as a sort of pilot proof of concept, and they ended up saying, you know what, we worked with our internal app development team, because they had that, and they sort of took the idea and ran with it, and they actually use that model now. The good news is that the way the migration works is if your MDM supports it, most of the good ones do, the apps should not be removed from the device. So they stay on the device, and MDM is removed, it comes over to Jamf, pops up, and then if they're in scope for those apps, if those apps need to be managed, if they're EMM apps, then Jamf will adopt management of them. And so they don't really lose any of them. Yeah. If it was something they had to pull from app catalog, like a personal thing or Slack or something, it just stays on the device. Yeah. And if they need to delete it, they need to go get it again, they go into Jamf self-service and pull it back down.
Something worth also noting is you might have some customers that are, they've just kept collecting apps. Education's horrible for this.
Hundreds of calculator apps.
And Bible apps that are not correct text and things like that. Sure. So they use this as an opportunity to spring clean. Like, okay, which of these apps are actually supposed to be on these devices? Which ones are vetted and approved by our cybersecurity? Like I had an education customer, there was 6 different versions of a Bible app that they were pushing out. One of them was filled with ads, and it was from like a Chinese developer, text all wrong and stuff like that. And that was just like, well, where's the gatekeeping? Where's this control of this? And there was none. So it's sort of also an opportunity. And again, our services team were great with like, do you want to move them all over, or do we want to check the list first?
Yeah, Dan, that's an excellent call out, because we're able to take that step after the migration, the cleanup, where we're removing the Migrate app and the other MDM's portal app. There can be the laundry list of, you know what, let's clean house and yank all these other silly ones off while we're doing that process.
We actually did that with some of our profiles. So some of the things that we were trying to do with Workspace ONE, we went,
whoops.
You were doing so well. It's the last session of the day.
It's been a long week, guys.
It's been a long week.
So I'm sure we'll cut that.
Customers allowed to say it.
There'll be a bleep. There'll be a bleep. You're allowed to say it.
Customers allowed to say it.
You're allowed to say it. We're not. You're allowed to.
I'm sure I'll hear about that later. But one of the things we did was we cleaned up our devices as part of this process. And again, that's where the engagement can help, because they'll ask those questions. They have the qualified questions from the people that have come before you and done this.
Yeah, and it also points out there's another detail that a lot of people maybe make wrong assumptions that Migrate is going to, as Dan was talking about, move all your stuff over to the Jamf server. You know, where's the magic button that moves all the profiles and all the settings and all the groups that you may have built out? And first of all, you don't want to bring that baggage with you, but also we might do it differently in Jamf. You know, it's an opportunity to change your profiles and maybe combine some or separate some if you've got certificates that are stale. It's a time to do it right when you move over to Jamf.
Yeah. More questions, thoughts?
Fantastic.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Well, with
That's
that,
it. Thank you so much.
Migrate.
Almost made it.
Almost made it.
So close.